So who is it that who is it who is who sorry who is it that is saying this thing that there is a okay, I hope you can comfortably see everything. If not, again you can use a laptop or something. So what are we looking at? So let's directly jump into the first para. Let's try and understand what the first para entails. Interpretations of the Indian past were inevitably influenced by colonial concerns and interest, and also by prevalent European ideas about history, civilization, and Orient. So history, civilization, and Orient, this is something we are talking about. Orientalist scholars studied the languages and text with selected Indian scholars, but made little attempts to understand the worldview of those who were teaching them. The reading, therefore, are something of a disjuncture from the traditional ways of looking at the Indian past. So basically, there were, these Orientalist scholars were actually studying the languages and the text of Indian, this thing, subcontinent, but they were not really interested in knowing the worldview of the teachers who were teaching them. So again, a colonial this thing, okay, just, learning things for the sake of it, not really paying too much attention as to what is the worldview of the person who is teaching it. Okay. What does this tell you? This tells you that, this is going to be an argumentative passage rather. The paragraph itself tells you a lot of arguments in there. Let's go and read the next para. Orientalism. Now they're defining it. Orientalism, which we can understand broadly as Western perception of the Orient, fueled the fantasy and the freedom sought by European Romanticism, particularly in opposition to the more disciplined neoclassicism. So this basically started off as some sort of a opposition. The cultures of Asia were seen as bringing new romantic paradigm, another renaissance. Now you will realize that sometimes you don't stop at full stops. I mean, I will not stop at full stop. I'll just read them in a this thing, just to have the main picture in my mind clear. So you don't really, you have to read the, I always say this thing, sorry if I'm digressing a little bit, I always say this thing that you have to read the passages or the paras in variable speeds. Okay, why is it important? Because we're not looking at facts. What we're looking at is the main idea. We're looking at the arguments, right? So yeah, that being said, let's delve into this one. Another renaissance was anticipated through an acquaintance with the Orient, and this, it was thought, would be different from the earlier Greek Renaissance. It was believed that this Oriental Renaissance would liberate European thoughts and literature from increasing focus on discipline and rationality that had followed from the earlier Enlightenment. The Romantic English poets Wordsworth, Coleridge were apprehensive of the changes introduced by industrialization and turned to nature and to fantasies of the Orient. So why is it that they were interested in doing this business of learning language and all that? One thing that I can sort of understand without digressing too much is that some sort of a renaissance these guys were predicting. This was different from the Greek Renaissance. Renaissance basically is their, you can just Google the meaning of Renaissance. It is just the revival of culture or something of that sort, right? So let's read the, okay, so there are not many paras. The third para. However, this enthusiasm gradually changed to conform with the emphasis later in the 19th century on the innate superiority of the European civilization. Okay, Oriental civilizations were now seen as having once been great, but currently in decline. The various phases of Orientalism tended to mold European understanding of the Indian past into a particular pattern. There was an attempt to formulate Indian culture as uniform, such formulations being derived from the texts that were given priority. The so-called discovery of India was largely through selected literature in Sanskrit. Okay, so please understand, this line is important. So the so-called, quote unquote so-called discovery of India was largely through selected literature in Sanskrit. This interpretation tended to emphasize non-historical aspect of Indian culture, for example, the idea of an unchanging continuity of society and religion over 3000 years, and it was believed that Indian pattern of life was so concerned with the metaphysics. This is an important word, metaphysics, basically talking about God and spiritualism, outside this thing, outside world is not really that much of importance. I would like to digress at this point in time, and this is very important. There is epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics in any philosophical learning. So if you go into the philosophical ideas, there is this metaphysics which basically talks about the internal world in general. Okay, the spiritual world, you can say. What these guys are saying, that some of the, these Orientalists or whatever, the European scholars who are studying this thing, what they did was they took some text from this Sanskrit literature, select texts from Sanskrit literature, and they basically thought that these Indian people are only concerned about the metaphysics and the subtleties of religious belief, that little attention was given to more tangible aspects. So this is something that these guys thought, that Indians are not really paying too much attention to the real world problems, the tangible problems, the economy and the world population, the global warming, something. I'm just digressing. I'm just taking you out of scope of the passage also, but this is important because you have to make certain analogies in your mind. So analogous situations will help you understand the idea of this passage, okay? Because this was anyways a bit abstract. German Romanticism, the fourth one. German Romanticism endorsed this image of India, and it became the mystic land for many Europeans, where even the most ordinary actions were imbued with a complex symbolism. This was the genesis of the idea of the spiritual East, and also incidentally a refuge of European intellectuals seeking to distance themselves from the changing pattern of their own society. So can you see how the thought process suddenly shifted? It started from Oriental scholars studying something which they were not paying too much attention to the teachers, and suddenly they're talking about German Romanticism and German the European people. These European peoples are now suddenly interested in India as a land, mystic land, wherein they can come as some sort of a refuge or something. A dichotomy in values was maintained. Indian values being described as spiritual and European as materialistic. This is very important. Indian values are described as spiritual and European values are materialistic, with little attempt to just juxtapose these values with the reality of Indian society. This theme has been even more firmly endorsed by the section of Indian opinion during the last 100 years. Don't really need to go, this is self-explanatory. Let's understand the concluding para. Let's read it. It was a consolation to the Indian intelligentsia for its perceived inability to counter the technical superiority of the West. Okay, so who is it that is saying this thing, that there is this is the consolation that Indian intelligentsia is getting for its perceived inability to counter the technical superiority. So industrial revolution and all that happened in the East, we know, and even technical superiority of the West, a superiority viewed as having enabled Europe to colonize Asia and other part of the world. At the height of anti-colonial nationalism, it acted as a salvation. Basically, I think they are salve basically is for your abbreviation for salvation, maybe. It acted as a salve for having been made a colony of the Britain. So basically they are saying ki, this consolation that Indian values are described as spiritual is sort of a consolation for the Indian intelligentsia to counter the technical superiority of the West. So a very interesting passage. So the questions, it can be inferred from the passage. So the questions: to gain a more accurate view of a nation's history and culture, scholars should do all of the following except. Okay, so they should do all of the following except. So there are 3 strengthening type options and 1 weakening type option. So my answer choice is the weakening type one, right? So I'll read the options. Before that, I'll go back and I'll try to form a shadow answer because this was a bit complicated. So the Orientalist scholar studied the language and the text which selected in, but made little attempt to understand the worldview of those who were teaching them. The readings therefore are something of a disjuncture from the traditional ways of looking at the Indian past. So basically they were not paying attention. This is something that we already discussed. They were not paying attention to the worldview of those who were teaching them. And in the next para, it is written that we can understand broadly as Western perception of the Orient fueled by the fantasy freedom sought by European romanticism, particularly in opposition to a more disciplined neoclassicism. So actually romanticism and neoclassicism is not something that, you know, you really need to know in order to answer this thing, but I'm still keeping it. The cultures of Asia are bringing romantic paradigm, and then Renaissance anticipated. Okay, we'll go back and read the options now, because I don't think reading the passage again will help you any which ways. To develop, okay, what are we looking at? 3 statements: strengthen, 1 weakening. Develop an oppositional framework to grasp cultural differences is something that they should. Okay, oppositional framework. What is an oppositional framework? We'll have to be very careful with this term, oppositional framework. We'll keep this one for the time being. Examine the complex realities of that nation society. This is something that they should do. This in fact strengthens the passage, is not my answer, goes out. Read widely in the country's literature. Is it not what these guys were anyways doing? They were reading the literature. Indian culture as uniform, such formulation was derived from text, were given priority. Such formulation being derived from texts that were given priority was largely through selected literature in Sanskrit. Selected literature in Sanskrit. This is your interesting thing, right? The selected thing. All right, so I'll go back. I'll go back to the option. Possibly, I think I have gotten my answer. Examine their own beliefs and biases. So yeah, widely they should do something that strengthens. These guys were not, you know, reading widely in the country's literature. They were only selecting, they were only picking up select text from the Sanskrit literature. So possibly this is also something which strengthens the passage, something that the people were not doing, they should have done. Okay, that ways you can eliminate this also. Examine their own beliefs and biases. If they examine their own beliefs and biases, that will give them a more accurate view of the nation's history and culture. Because if they, you know, examine their own beliefs and biases, were these Orientalists examining their own beliefs and biases? I don't think they were doing, because now if you go back to the passage, you will realize, see, every time you'd have to ask such questions, were they doing this thing? I don't think they were doing, because, you know, somewhere it is written that your European people were not really giving too much attention to the worldview of the, you know, people teaching them the Indian texts. So in a way, they already were holding to the beliefs and biases of these people. Which people? The European people. So they already were holding to their beliefs and biases. They were not letting go of it. In other words, they were not examining it. So possibly something that I can eliminate at this point, which makes this my answer. I would again come back to this after some time. It can be inferred from the passage that the author is not likely to support the view that. Fine, again, you would have to read. This is an interesting question type. You should have left this passage in an exam condition, ideally. It can be inferred from the passage that the author is not likely to support. Let's read the first one. The Orientalist view of Asia fired the imagination of some Western poets. Orientalist view of Asia fired the imagination of some Western poets is something, you know, has to do with this Wordsworth or Coleridge, because I've read somewhere, you know, about Wordsworth and Coleridge somewhere. Yeah, so over there. The Romantic English poets Wordsworth, Coleridge were apprehensive of the changes introduced by industrialization and turned to nature and fantasies of the Orient. And Orientalist are these, these people who are reading about the texts and everything about this thing, right? So in a way, yes, the first one can be inferred. Okay, Orientalists view of Asia fired the imagination of some of the Western poet. Wordsworth, Coleridge. Okay, poet is something that helped me eliminate this one, because we are looking at not likely to follow, support. So this goes out. Indian culture acknowledges the material aspect of life. Isko to aankh band karke you can ignore. Indian culture does not do that. India's culture has evolved over the centuries. This is also true. This is also true. India became a colony although it matched the technical knowledge of the West. Something that is not likely to support the view. Author is not likely to support this view. Okay. Not likely to support is also, in a way, you can say 3 he will support, 1 he will not support. So you can use this type of a template: 3 strengthen, 1 weaken in. So this is your answer: 3, 1 weaken. Became a colony although it matched the technical knowledge of the West is not something that is given in the passage. Also, passage is written by the author. That's why the author will not likely support this. So this is indirectly I'm saying that this is the answer to this thing. Also, Indian culture is evolved over the centuries. This is too generic. Again, I should not cancel an option on a generic this thing, but I can't help it. Let's go to the, I mean, you can agree to disagree, and if you have a better idea, I would want you to give me that idea in the comment section. Which of the following styles of research is most similar to the Orientalist scholars' method of understanding history and culture? Please understand, this is a very simple question if you understand it clearly. Which one of the following styles of research is most similar to the Orientalist scholars' method of understanding Indian history and culture? What is it that Orientalist scholars were doing? They were studying the Indian texts and the language, but they were not paying too much attention to the nuances of the teachers. They were not really interested in the worldview of the teachers. So in a way, they had some sort of a laid back attitude towards this thing. And also, somewhere it is written that the Western perception of the Orient fueled the fantasy and something of that sort. Another Renaissance was anticipated through acquaintance with the Orient. And okay, fine. So we'll go to the options and see. I don't think this would be that much of a difficult this thing. At the back of your mind, you can possibly keep the idea of the Oriental this thing. All right, let's read. Reading about the life of early American settlers and later waves of migration to understand the evolution of American culture. Is this similar to Orient? Okay, is this most similar to the Oriental scholar? I don't think so. So I'll eliminate this at this point in time, because reading about the life of early American settlers and later waves of migration to understand evolution of American culture is doing a lot of research. These guys were not doing that much research. They were reading the text, they were understanding everything, but they were not paying attention to the nuances. This question is directly taking you to a nuance structure. So getting out of reading 18th century accounts of travelers to India and see how they viewed Indian life and culture of the time. No, this is again adding nuance to this thing. These guys, I mean, I have this thing in my head that these guys were not paying too much attention to the nuances. The Oriental scholars. Reading the 18th century accounts by travelers to India to see how they viewed Indian life. How they viewed Indian life? Who are these they? These are the travelers who traveled to India and their 18th century account. Reading those accounts. Is this something that these guys were doing? No, they were only reading select Sanskrit texts. They were not reading everything and then making up a view. They were only reading select texts. I hope you can see how I'm able to connect the ideas. So this is also goes out. Studying artifacts excavated at a palace to understand the lifestyle of those who lived there. Nuance goes out. analyzing Hollywood action movie that depicts violence and sex to understand contemporary America. This is something that Orientalist will do, na? Because what the Oriental scholars did, they only picked up select, Sanskrit text and said that Indians are only concerned about the metaphysics of life. They do not concern themselves with the more tangible aspects of life. So this is a bang on answer, the most easy answer choice. Last one, in the context of the passage, all of the following statements are true except. Okay. 3 statements are true, 1 false. You're supposed to find the false one. Okay. This basically helps me, keep certain things in my mind clear. Orientalist scholarship influenced Indians. Orientalist scholarships. Indian texts influenced Orientalist scholars. India's spiritualism served as a salve for European colonizer. I have this habit, whenever something, I don't know whether this statement, India's spiritualism served as a salve for European colonizer, is right or wrong at this point in time. But one thing that I know is that somewhere in the passage it is given. So I will pay more attention to this one. Either I will be able to eliminate this, in which case I will only be left with 3 options, or if I cannot eliminate it, this can be my answer. So I'll pay attention to this. So this is something because I remember that I read something like that. Or last para, I think it is. Yeah. It was a consolation to the Indian intelligentsia for the perceived inability to counter the technical superiority of the West, a superiority viewed as having enabled Europe to colonize Asia and other parts of the world. At the height of anti-colonial nationalism, it acted as a salve for having been made a colony of the Britain. Okay, so again, this is I'm not able to. India's spiritualism served as a salve for European colonizers. Is it India's colonization? See, in the last line, in the last to last para, it is said, at the reality of Indian society, this theme has been even more firmly endorsed by the section of Indian opinion during the last 100 years. So this theme has been firmly endorsed by a section of Indian opinion during the last 100 years. It was a consolation to the Indian intelligentsia for its perceived inability to counter the technical superiority of the West. At the height of anti-colonialism, it acted as a salve for having been made a colony of the Britain. So who is it? I mean, again, I don't want to go into that thing. Who is it that is saying that, that acted as a salve for being made a colony of the Britain? Indian spiritualism served as a salve for European colonizers. This is something that the Indians were using. So I can understand that much. Okay, I'll keep this one. So possibly this is my answer, but I'll keep this one. I'll read the other options. Orientalist scholarship influenced Indians. Is it that the Orientalists influenced Indians in any way? I don't think so. It is only said that the European settlers come to India and some sort of this thing happened. So goes out. Indian texts influenced Orientalist scholars. Definitely not. These guys were not even reading the entire texts. They were only taking select texts and reading it. Goes out. Now you can see sometimes selecting a answer is very difficult, but eliminating options becomes comparatively easy. Orientalists' understanding of Indian history was linked to colonial concerns. Concerns is something that I will pay full attention to eliminate. So 3 has to be my answer, that India. So basically these guys, what they are saying is, because we were so much spiritually inclined, these guys just came in and did their colonial whatever, and we just did not paid any attention. So this is the meaning of this line. So yeah, I hope you have been able to understand what this thing is. Cat is like this only. You will not be able to in an exam condition. I'm not solving this one. or maybe 1 or 2 question I will solve and I'll leave the others. This is what you are supposed to do. You're not supposed to solve all the questions. Thank you guys. So there's a link to support the channel in the description. Please consider it. Your support does matter. Thank you.